we can see that getting good sleep is more about your overall lifestyle than just what you're supposed to do right before you go to bed. Because really, to optimize sleep, it comes down to what you do when you start waking up, what you do throughout the day, every single day, until you're about to go to sleep. So one thing I practice throughout the day and something that I think can help you optimize your sleep is holding your breath. Now, you might look at me like I'm crazy. Like, why would holding my breath help me go to sleep? Well, this was really brought to a lot of people by a guy named Patrick McKeown, and he wrote a book called The Oxygen Advantage. It's a very good book, and it talks more in detail about what I'm going to talk about, but the goal is to get more oxygen to your cells. Again, you might be wondering, why would holding my breath get more oxygen delivery to my cells? Well, the thing here is you want to increase your CO2. So your carbon dioxide is a molecule that's released when we breathe out. We do not get carbon dioxide from the air that we breathe. Only 0.03% carbon dioxide is in our air around us. The carbon dioxide comes from when we're exercising and also from our body's metabolism. So when we're holding our breath, our body is undergoing metabolism and it's building up more CO2. So the thing is, I talked about this before, that a lot of people have become over breathers, where they're breathing too excessively. This is more in the westernized culture, where people have become mouth breathers and they start breathing really quickly and they start expelling a lot of their CO2. Now, what happens is a condition called hypocapnia. Hypocapnia is when you have too low CO2 levels. And what happens is you get sort of vasoconstriction and bronchoconstriction. So basically, all the tubes in your body will start to shrink. So this will include your breathing tubes. This will include all of your circulatory system, so all of your blood vessels. All of them will start to shrink. Now, this will make it really hard for oxygen to make its way to your cells because, first of all, when you have a smaller airway and your breathing tubes are shrinking, then it's harder for air to get into your lungs. And also when your blood is having to travel through smaller constricted arteries, then it's going to be harder for oxygen to make its way to your cells. So dilating that will help a long way. And the way to do that is by increasing your CO2 levels, because when you have higher amounts of CO2, you will start to get vasodilation, bronchodilation, where everything will start to dilate and make it easier for this oxygen to get to your cells. That's the ultimate goal here. The ultimate goal is to improve the way that you're sleeping and improve the oxygen delivery to your brain and your other cells in your body. So human beings are the only beings to breathe through their mouth. If you look at any other animal, even dogs, they all breathe through their nose. You might be wondering, well, I've taken my dog on a walk and their mouth is open the whole time. Well, that's because they're really excited and they're exercising, but when you see them sleeping or you see them relaxing, you'll see that even dogs regularly have their mouth closed and they are breathing through their nose. And that's actually a sign of health in animals. When we see an animal that has to drop its mouth open and start to breathe through its mouth, that's a sign that that animal is unhealthy and should definitely be taken to a vet. So for some reason, it's become normal for humans to start breathing through their mouth. And what happens is when you're breathing through your mouth, you're taking really shallow, quicker breaths. And these are these upper chest breaths where they only use the upper half of your lungs. And first of all, when you take these quicker breaths, it can put you more into a fight or flight response. It can put you more into a sympathetic mode. And this will further drive up your breathing and further make you breathe quicker. And all this is doing is expelling all the CO2 in your lungs, all the CO2 that's in your body. The goal of us exhaling is to get rid of excess CO2. Now, the key word there is excess, because when you start over breathing and breathing too excessively, you get rid of too much of the CO2. You might be looking at me like I'm crazy if I say to start holding your breath, because your oxygen saturation might go down. And if you're not getting more oxygen, then there's no oxygen to get to your cells. Well, most people, their oxygen saturation is about 95 to 99%. So unless you have some sort of lung condition like COPD, then usually your oxygen saturation will be really high. So the issue is not your oxygen saturation, because even when you take slower breaths and you start reducing your amount of breathing, your oxygen saturation will still be high. The hard part is getting that oxygen to get delivered to your cells. Because when our CO2 levels are low, then our oxygen cannot be delivered to our cells. So the way this works is as we breathe in oxygen, and then this oxygen will attach to a molecule called hemoglobin. This hemoglobin travels in our red blood cells and will travel to all of our cells in our body to go and deliver this oxygen. But when the CO2 is not present, then this oxygen will never detach from this hemoglobin, and it will never go to our cells. So our oxygen saturation will still be high. If you look at a pulse oximeter, you'll see that, oh, my oxygen saturation is very high, I must be healthy. But that doesn't mean that oxygen is going to your cells. So that's the issue there. And that's what we want to improve by increasing the amount of CO2. By increasing the amount of CO2 in your body, you are increasing your oxygen carrying capacity. So right off the bat, I would only recommend this if you can breathe through your nose regularly and you don't have any lung problems. So before you do any breath holding or any of these exercises I recommend, make sure you ask your doctor beforehand, let them know what you want to try doing, and they will go over any risks with you. So when do I practice breath holding and how do I practice it? So I practice it pretty much throughout the day, any chance I get. So I practice it when I am driving. I practice it when I'm doing a warm-up before I work out. I practice it before I go to sleep. All I'm doing is I'm holding my breath and I'm waiting until I get a moderate to strong urge to breathe. Now, you want to do this differently depending on your fitness status, and I can make another video or another podcast later kind of going into details on different exercises I would recommend for different people. But basically, any chance I get and I'm not having to talk to people, I'm practicing holding my breath. Not all day long, but as much as I can. So when you hold your breath, you want to, again, create a medium to strong urge to breathe. You don't want to hold it as long as possible. If you try holding your breath and after you're done, you're gasping for air like you're about to die, well, I think that did more harm than good. You don't need to do all that to get the benefits. You want to be able to recover with basically non-existent breathing. So this is what our breathing is supposed to look like. Our breathing is supposed to be very silent and kind of slow. And after you recover from a breath hold, you want it to be that type of recovery. You can have maybe one or two breaths that you have to recover, but then after that, it should be back to your normal, slow, almost kind of non-existent breathing. And the other thing here is you want to engage your diaphragm when you're breathing. I talked a little bit about engaging your diaphragm in some other videos, but a simple way to do that is take both your hands and put one hand over your chest and one hand right above your belly button. I'm not going to do it now because I have this microphone here and I might disrupt the audio, but as you breathe in through your nose, see if your chest is rising or your belly is rising. If your chest is rising, then you're not doing it correctly. You want to be able to breathe so that you're using your diaphragm. And when you use your diaphragm, your belly will start to rise. Now, you also don't want to over-exaggerate this. You don't want to breathe so that your belly is sticking all the way out. You just want to make it kind of subtle. And if you're feeling that you're getting a little bit of resistance with your hand that's over your belly button, that's a good sign. So that means you're breathing, that you're using your diaphragm, and that's the way that you should be breathing. Now, the cool thing about the diaphragm is that it will also increase the surface area of CO2 in our lungs. So when we engage our diaphragm, it'll spread our CO2 out across the entire surface area of our lungs and basically make our breathing more efficient. So you might be wondering, how many times do I need to practice this breath hold throughout the day? I think a good number to shoot for is 10 times. If you get 10 of these reps throughout the day, then you are improving your CO2 levels in a safe way. Now, you might be wondering, isn't this the same thing as sleep apnea? Because when we have sleep apnea, we're forced to stop breathing, and it's basically a breath hold. So couldn't this cause some damage to our bodies? Now, this is a really interesting topic because I was wondering the same thing. And we know that sleep apnea has a lot of detrimental effects. And when we're forced to stop breathing, this will create a lot of oxidative stress in our body, and this oxidative stress will contribute to a lot of chronic health problems on top of potentially dying. So there's a difference, though, with forced breath holding and intentional breath holding. Now, the difference here is we are intentionally holding our breath. And they even did studies of elite breath holders. And they actually show the exact opposite effects of the effects of sleep apnea. So people who are elite breath holders, they are able to have intense drops in their O2 saturation. They're able to have intense drops in their oxygen saturation without having any brain injury or any blackouts. So it definitely takes time and practice to get to this level, but that just goes to show that there's a difference between intentionally holding your breath and being forced to do it when you have sleep apnea. That may or may not be because when you are intentionally doing it, you are sort of temporarily lowering your oxygen saturation and you're doing it more in a safe and controlled way. But regardless, if you do it intentionally, you will actually get benefits versus when you have sleep apnea, then you're going to get all the negative effects of it. So there are also other benefits you get when you do an intentional breath hold. We talked a little bit about CO2, and as you hold your breath, your CO2 levels go up and your oxygen carrying capacity goes up. But also, you're able to produce more red blood cells when you hold your breath. Because when you hold your breath and you temporarily lower your oxygen saturation, your spleen will start contracting and your spleen will start releasing more red blood cells. So now when you start breathing normally again, now you have more red blood cells that can carry more of this oxygen. So again, like I said, you have a really high oxygen saturation for most people who breathe normally. And when you have more red blood cells, now more of this oxygen can go to your cells. Also, your kidneys will produce something called erythropoietin, or EPO. Now, this is a hormone that stimulates even more red blood cell production. So, you get way more red blood cells by simply practicing holding your breath. And these red blood cells carry that molecule called hemoglobin, which will increase your oxygen carrying capacity. And when you have more oxygen carrying capacity, more of this oxygen can work its way to your cells, and this makes it less likely that you will be chronically tired in the morning because your brain and your other organs are getting more oxygen. And this can really improve your sleep and really improve your ability to get deep sleep so that you're less tired in the morning. One thing I hear all the time is, I can't breathe through my nose because my nose is always blocked. So what am I supposed to do? Well, there is a natural way to unblock your nose. Unblocking your nose comes down to 3 simple steps, but each step is very important. So step number 1